What happens when one of the most talked about women in the world sits down for what should be a straightforward interview and it turns into an absolute spectacle that nobody saw coming? Well, that's exactly what unfolded this morning on CNN. And trust me, you're going to want to hear every single word of this because it was nothing short of explosive. Before we get into all the details, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about all of this. Because honestly, the reactions are going to be all over the place. So let's set the scene. Meghan Markle was scheduled to appear on CNN this morning for what was supposed to be a discussion about her latest philanthropic initiatives and some of her ongoing projects. Standard stuff, right? The kind of interview we've seen 100 times before. Anderson Cooper was filling in as a guest host. And you know Anderson, he's professional, he's thorough, and he doesn't usually let things get too far off the rails. But something about this morning was different from the very first question. Anderson started off pleasant enough, welcoming Meghan to the show and thanking her for taking the time to join them. Meghan smiled, did her usual gracious nod, and settled into her chair, looking perfectly composed in a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything seemed fine, totally normal. Just another day of celebrity interviews on morning television. Then, Anderson asked his first real question, and this is where you could feel the temperature in the room change. He said, "Meghan, you've been very vocal about your struggles with privacy and media intrusion over the years. But you've also maintained a very public presence through interviews, your podcast, and various media appearances. How do you reconcile those two things? How do you balance wanting privacy while also staying in the public eye?" Now, that's a fair question, right? It's something a lot of people have wondered about. And it's not like it's some gotcha moment or anything. It's journalism. It's what interviewers do. But you could see Meghan's expression shift immediately. Her smile got a little tighter, her shoulders went back, and she took this long pause before answering. She said, "Well, Anderson, I think that's a bit of a false equivalence, don't you? Wanting to control your own narrative and wanting to share your truth on your own terms is very different from having lies and invasive stories published about you without your consent." Anderson nodded along. Doing that thing he does where he listens carefully and processes what someone is saying, then he followed up, and this is where things started to get tense. He said, "I understand that distinction, but when you participate in highly publicized interviews and media projects, you're inviting a certain level of public scrutiny. That's just the nature of celebrity and public life. Do you feel that some of that scrutiny is warranted given the choices you've made to remain in the spotlight?" Meghan's face did this thing. You know that look when someone is trying really hard to stay calm, but you can tell they're annoyed. She laughed, but it wasn't a genuine laugh. It was one of those laughs that actually means, "I can't believe you just said that," she responded. "So what you're saying is that because I choose to speak about issues that matter to me, issues like mental health and social justice, I deserve to have my privacy invaded and my family harassed. Is that what you're suggesting?" Anderson immediately clarified, "No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm simply asking about the balance between public engagement and the expectation of privacy. You've built a brand around being open and vulnerable, which is admirable, but that openness does come with consequences. I'm trying to understand where you draw the line." And Meghan shot back faster than you'd expect. "The line, Anderson, is drawn at human decency. The line is drawn at making up stories about my children, at photoshopping images to make me look bad, at writing entire articles based on anonymous sources who don't exist. That's where the line is. And frankly, I'm surprised that you, of all people, someone who I thought understood the responsibility of journalism, would sit here and try to justify that kind of behavior." You could feel the entire studio tense up. Anderson kept his composure because that's what he does. But you could see in his eyes that he was not expecting this level of defensiveness. He said, "I'm not justifying anything, Meghan. I'm asking questions, which is my job. And I think these are questions that a lot of people have. You can't control how people perceive you, and when you're as high profile as you are, people are going to have opinions. Some of those opinions won't be favorable. That's just reality." Meghan leaned forward, and her voice got this edge to it that wasn't there before. She said, "Opinions are one thing, Anderson, but coordinated attacks are another. There's a difference between someone not liking me and entire media organizations being paid to destroy my reputation. And the fact that you're sitting here acting like those two things are the same is honestly really disappointing." Anderson took a breath, and you could tell he was choosing his words carefully. He said, "I think you're misunderstanding my question. I'm not equating fair criticism with harassment. What I'm trying to explore is the idea that when you engage with the media on your terms, when you do the big interviews and the documentary series and all of that, you're participating in the same system that you criticize. And I'm wondering if you see any contradiction in that." That's when Meghan really went off. She said, "So you're telling me that because I've done interviews where I've shared my story, my lived experience, that means I can't call out the media when they lie about me? That's the most backwards logic I've ever heard. By that standard, nobody who's ever been on television has the right to complain about anything written about them. Do you realize how absurd that sounds?" Anderson stayed calm, but you could tell he was getting a little frustrated too. He said, "That's not what I'm saying, and I think you know that. What I'm saying is that you've cultivated a very specific public image, and part of that image is built on being a victim of the media. But at the same time, you're using the media to build your platform and your brand. Those things can both be true, but they do create a complicated dynamic." Meghan's voice went up a notch, and she said, "A victim? Did you just call me a victim? I'm not a victim, Anderson. I'm a survivor. There's a huge difference. And the fact that you would use that word shows exactly what the problem is. Women, especially women of color, get labeled as victims or as playing the victim card whenever they stand up for themselves. It's a silencing tactic, and I'm not going to sit here and let you do that to me." Anderson looked genuinely taken aback. He said, "Meghan, I apologize if that word offended you. That wasn't my intention. But I do think we need to be able to have an honest conversation about these dynamics without it turning into an accusation fest. I'm not attacking you. I'm asking questions that I think are relevant and that our viewers want answers to." Meghan crossed her arms and said, "Well, maybe your viewers need to examine why they're so obsessed with tearing down a woman who's just trying to live her life and do some good in the world. Maybe the question isn't, why do I do interviews? Maybe the question is, why is everyone so threatened by me having a voice?" Anderson responded. "I don't think anyone is threatened by you having a voice, Meghan. I think people are curious about the choices you make and the way you navigate your public life. And curiosity isn't the same as hostility. You're a public figure, and public figures get asked tough questions. That's part of the deal." Meghan shot back immediately. "No, Anderson, that's not part of the deal. Being lied about isn't part of the deal. Having people make up stories about your mental health, about your marriage, about your children, that's not part of any deal I signed up for. And if you can't see the difference between legitimate journalism and tabloid garbage, then I don't know what to tell you." The tension was so thick at this point that you could practically see it through the screen. Anderson tried to steer things back, saying, "Let's take a step back here. I want to understand your perspective. You've talked about feeling unsupported by certain institutions, and about the toll that took on your mental health. That's important, and I think people empathize with that. But at what point do you take responsibility for your own role in how your story is told?" And that's when Meghan stood up. She didn't storm off or anything dramatic like that, but she stood up, and everyone in the studio froze. Meghan looked directly at Anderson and said, "My role? My role in how my story is told. Anderson, I have told my story. I sat down and did a whole interview where I laid everything out, where I was vulnerable and honest, and what happened? I got called a liar. I got accused of making things up. So don't talk to me about my role in this when the real issue is that people don't want to hear the truth." Anderson remained seated, keeping his voice level, and said, "Meghan, please sit down. Let's continue this conversation. I'm not trying to upset you. I'm trying to have a dialogue. But you have to understand that when you make serious allegations, people are going to question them. That's not personal. That's just how it works. People want evidence. They want corroboration. They want to understand the full picture." Meghan sat back down, but she was clearly agitated. She said, "Evidence? What kind of evidence do you want, Anderson? Do you want me to provide you with recordings of private conversations? Do you want me to show you medical records? Because that's an invasion of privacy, which is exactly what we were just talking about. I told my truth, and if people choose not to believe it, that says more about them than it does about me." Anderson leaned forward slightly and said, "But Meghan, you have to see how this looks from the outside. You make these claims, but then you don't provide any specifics. You talk about concerns being raised about your son's skin color, but you won't say who said it. You talk about being denied help for your mental health, but the institution you're referring to says that's not true. When there are these contradictions, people are going to have questions. Meghan's eyes widened, and she said, "So now you're calling me a liar? Is that what this is? You brought me on here to ambush me and call me a liar on national television. Because if that's what this is, Anderson, you should have just been honest about it from the beginning, instead of pretending this was going to be a respectful conversation." Anderson shook his head and said, "I'm not calling you a liar. I'm pointing out that there are different perspectives on these events, and as a journalist, I have to acknowledge that. Your truth is your truth, but other people have their truths too, and sometimes those truths don't align. That doesn't make anyone a liar necessarily. It just means that people experienced things differently." Meghan laughed again, that same bitter laugh from before, and said, "That's such a convenient cop-out, Anderson. When powerful institutions are accused of wrongdoing, suddenly it's all about different perspectives and different truths. But if I were accusing some regular person of something, you wouldn't be sitting here talking about multiple truths. You'd be asking for facts." "The double standard is incredible," Anderson responded. "There's no double standard here. I would ask the same questions regardless of who was making the accusations. And actually, I think I'm being quite fair by giving you the opportunity to address these concerns directly. A lot of journalists wouldn't even bother. They just write their opinion pieces and move on." "I'm here trying to understand your point of view," Meghan said. "Oh, how generous of you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to defend myself against accusations that shouldn't exist in the first place. Do you hear yourself? This whole conversation is based on the premise that I owe people explanations for my own lived experience. I don't owe anyone anything, Anderson. I shared my story because I thought it might help other people who are going through similar things. That was the point, not to satisfy the curiosity of people who were never going to believe me anyway." Anderson took a different approach and said, "Okay, let's talk about the impact then. Your interview, the one you're referring to, had massive global reach. Millions of people watched it. It sparked conversations about race, about mental health, about institutional accountability. Those are all important topics. But it also caused a lot of pain for other people, people who felt they were unfairly characterized or thrown under the bus. Do you have any regrets about how that played out?" Meghan's jaw tightened, and she said, "Regrets? Do I have regrets about finally standing up for myself? No, Anderson, I don't. And the fact that you're asking me if I regret speaking my truth while ignoring all the pain that was caused to me first is exactly the problem. Where's the accountability for the people who made my life hell? Where's the accountability for the racist coverage, for the lies, for the invasion of privacy? Why is it always on me to be the bigger person, to consider everyone else's feelings when nobody considered mine?" Anderson said, "I'm not saying you should have stayed silent. I'm asking if you think there might have been a better way to handle it, a way that didn't involve such a public airing of grievances. Because once you put something out there like that, you can't take it back, and the consequences have been significant. Not just for you, but for a lot of people." Meghan stood up again, and this time she really looked like she was done. She said, "You know what, Anderson? I came here thinking we were going to have a real conversation about the work I'm doing, about the causes I care about making a difference in the world. But instead, you've spent this entire time questioning my credibility, questioning my motives, and basically suggesting that I should have just kept my mouth shut and suffered in silence. That's not journalism, that's a hit job." Anderson stood up too, and he said, "Meghan, that's not fair. I've asked you legitimate questions that deserve answers. If you're not willing to engage with those questions, that's your choice. But don't accuse me of conducting a hit job when all I've done is my job as a journalist. You can't expect to come on a news program and only get softball questions that make you feel good." Meghan grabbed her bag from beside her chair and said, "There's a difference between tough questions and hostile questions. Anderson, and you've crossed that line repeatedly during this interview, I don't need to sit here and be disrespected like this. I've dealt with enough disrespect to last a lifetime, and I'm not going to tolerate it anymore." "Not even from someone like you," Anderson said. "If you feel disrespected, I apologize, but I stand by every question I've asked. They're questions that needed to be asked, and honestly, your refusal to engage with them in a meaningful way is telling. You can't just throw out serious allegations and then act offended when people want more information." Meghan turned to face him fully and said, "I've given all the information I'm going to give. I told my story, I lived through it, and I don't owe you or anyone else a detailed breakdown of every traumatic moment of my life. The fact that you think I do shows how little you understand about trauma, about privacy, and about basic human dignity." Anderson said, "This isn't about trauma or dignity, Meghan. This is about accountability. You made claims that affected real people, real institutions, and those claims have consequences. You can't hide behind trauma every time someone asks you a difficult question. That's not how this works." Meghan's voice rose, and she said, "I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm protecting myself and my family from people who want to keep tearing us down. And clearly, you're one of those people. I thought you were better than this, Anderson. I really did. But you're just like all the rest of them. More interested in creating drama than in actually listening." Anderson said, "I have been listening, Meghan. I've listened to everything you've said, and I've responded thoughtfully and fairly. But listening doesn't mean agreeing with everything you say or not challenging you when something doesn't add up. That's not real journalism. That's just propaganda," Meghan said. "So now I'm a propagandist. Is that what you're saying? Because I'm telling my story from my perspective, I'm spreading propaganda. The audacity of that statement is unbelievable. You sit here in your position of power and privilege, and you have the nerve to accuse me of propaganda when all I've done is try to survive and tell the truth about it," Anderson said. "I didn't call you a propagandist. I said that journalism requires challenging people, not just accepting everything they say at face value. And yes, that includes you. You're not above scrutiny just because you've had difficult experiences. Nobody is above scrutiny, especially when they put themselves in the public eye the way you have," Meghan said. "I'm not above scrutiny, but I am above being treated like a criminal for speaking up about abuse and racism. That's what this feels like, Anderson. It feels like I'm being put on trial for daring to say that I was mistreated. And the fact that you can't see that, the fact that you think this is just normal journalism, is deeply troubling," Anderson said. "If that's how you feel, then I'm sorry, but I disagree completely. I think I've been more than fair with you today. And frankly, if you can't handle these kinds of questions, then maybe you need to reconsider how you engage with the media going forward. Because this is what real interviews look like. They're not always comfortable, they're not always friendly, but they're necessary." Meghan looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "You know what, Anderson? You're right about one thing. I do need to reconsider how I engage with the media, and that starts right now. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with this conversation. And I'm done with people like you who pretend to care about the truth while actively working to undermine it." Anderson looked at the producers off camera, and you could see him trying to figure out how to handle this situation. He turned back to Meghan and said, "If you want to leave, that's your choice, but I think you're making a mistake. Walking away from tough questions doesn't make them go away. It just makes it look like you don't have answers. Is that really the message you want to send?" Meghan stopped and turned back around, and her expression was something between anger and disbelief. She said, "The message I want to send, Anderson, is that I will not be bullied or manipulated into defending myself against baseless accusations. You've structured this entire interview around the assumption that I'm somehow in the wrong, that I've done something that needs to be explained or justified. But I haven't. I spoke my truth, and if people have a problem with that, they need to examine why the truth makes them so uncomfortable," Anderson said. "But that's exactly the issue, Meghan. You keep saying my truth as if truth is subjective. Truth is truth. Facts are facts. And when your version of events contradicts other people's versions, we have to try to figure out what actually happened. That's not bullying. That's basic fact-finding. And your unwillingness to engage with that process is frustrating. Not just for me, but for everyone watching who wants to understand what really went on," Meghan said. "What really went on is that I was treated terribly by people who were supposed to protect me and support me. What really went on is that I experienced racism and cruelty and indifference to my mental health. Those are facts, Anderson. Those are my facts. And the reason other people's versions contradict mine is because they're trying to cover up what they did. They're trying to rewrite history to make themselves look better. But I was there. I lived it. And no amount of PR spin is going to change what I know to be true." Anderson rubbed his forehead, clearly exhausted by this back and forth, and said, "Okay, so everyone who contradicts your account is lying or covering something up. Is that what you're saying? Because that's a pretty serious accusation to make. You're essentially saying that multiple people and institutions are engaged in some kind of coordinated effort to discredit you. Do you have any proof of that? Meghan said, "The proof is in how they've treated me from day one. The proof is in the stories that were planted in the press. The proof is in the lack of support when I needed it most. I don't need to show you documents or recordings for those things to be true. Anyone who was paying attention could see what was happening. The only people who couldn't see it are the people who didn't want to see it," Anderson said. "But Meghan, you're asking people to just take your word for it. And while I understand that some things are difficult to prove, you have to give people something more than just your assertion that it happened. Otherwise, it becomes a he said, she said situation, and those are impossible to resolve. That's why specifics matter. That's why evidence matters. Not because I don't believe you, but because that's how we establish what's actually true." Meghan crossed her arms again and said, "I gave specifics. I talked about specific incidents, specific feelings, specific moments. But apparently, that's not good enough for you. You want names, you want dates, you want a whole investigative report. But here's the thing, Anderson. I'm not a journalist. I'm not an investigator. I'm a person who went through something traumatic and decided to talk about it. And I shouldn't have to build a legal case just to have my experience acknowledged and respected," Anderson said. "You're right, you're not a journalist. But you did make very public accusations that have had real-world consequences. And when you do that, you open yourself up to scrutiny. That's not unfair, that's just reality. You can't selectively engage with the public sphere, taking the parts you like and rejecting the parts you don't. It doesn't work that way. If you're going to be a public figure who speaks out on important issues, you have to be willing to answer the tough questions that come with that." Meghan's voice got quieter but more intense, and she said, "I have answered the tough questions, Anderson, over and over again, but it's never enough. No matter what I say, no matter how I say it, there's always someone like you ready to poke holes in it, to question my motives, to suggest that maybe I'm exaggerating or misremembering or just plain lying. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of having to prove that my pain is real, that my experiences are valid." "I shouldn't have to do that," Anderson said. "I understand that you're tired, and I understand that this has been difficult for you. But being tired doesn't exempt you from accountability. You made choices, you told your story in a very public way, and now you have to deal with the response to that. Some of that response is supportive, and some of it is critical. That's the nature of public discourse. And getting angry at me for asking questions isn't going to change that," Meghan said. "I'm not angry at you for asking questions, Anderson. I'm angry at you for the way you're asking them. There's a tone to this conversation, a condescension, that's been there from the beginning. You're treating me like I'm some kind of suspect being interrogated rather than a guest on your show. And that's disrespectful. I deserve better than that, and quite honestly, your audience deserves better than watching you badger someone who's already been through enough," Anderson said. "I don't think I've been condescending, and I certainly haven't been badgering you. I've been direct, yes, and I've been persistent. But that's because these are important questions that deserve clear answers. And I don't think it's condescending to expect a public figure to engage with criticism and scrutiny. That's part of being in the position you're in. If you can't handle that, then maybe you need to reconsider your approach to public life," Meghan said. "Maybe you need to reconsider your approach to interviewing people. Because what you're doing right now isn't journalism, it's an interrogation. You're not trying to understand my perspective, you're trying to trap me, to get me to say something you can use against me, and I'm not going to give you that satisfaction. I know how this game works, Anderson. I've been dealing with it for years now," Anderson said. "This isn't a game, Meghan, and I'm not trying to trap you. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about complicated issues, but you seem determined to see hostility where there isn't any. Every question I've asked has been reasonable and relevant. The fact that you're uncomfortable with them doesn't make them unfair. It just means they're touching on things you'd rather not address." Meghan looked directly into the camera, nodded at Anderson, and said, "You know what? I think the people watching can decide for themselves whether this has been a fair interview or not. I think they can see exactly what's been happening here. And I hope they'll think critically about why a woman speaking her truth is met with this level of hostility and skepticism, while the institutions that harmed her get the benefit of the doubt," Anderson said. "I haven't given anyone the benefit of the doubt. I've approached this conversation with an open mind, trying to understand all sides of a complex situation. But you keep framing this as if there's only one side, your side. And anyone who questions that is automatically wrong or biased. That's not how truth works, Meghan. Truth emerges from examining multiple perspectives, from weighing evidence, from careful analysis. It doesn't just spring fully formed from one person's account. Meghan said, "My account is all I have, Anderson. It's my life, my experience, my reality. And I shouldn't have to defend it to you or to anyone else. The fact that I'm even here doing this, subjecting myself to this kind of treatment, shows how much I care about setting the record straight. But clearly, that's not what you're interested in. You're interested in creating controversy and making me look bad. In giving ammunition to people who already hate me," Anderson said. "If I wanted to make you look bad, Meghan, I could have done that in 100 different ways. I could have brought up all the rumors, all the tabloid stories, all the criticisms that have been leveled at you over the years. But I haven't done that. I've focused on the things you've said publicly, the claims you've made, and I've asked you to clarify and expand on those claims. That's responsible journalism. That's giving you a fair hearing. And the fact that you can't see that is honestly concerning." Meghan picked up her bag again and said, "You know what's concerning, Anderson? The fact that you think this is what responsible journalism looks like, the fact that you think it's okay to sit here and question everything, I say while never once questioning the motives or the credibility of the people who hurt me. That's what's concerning, and I'm not going to participate in it anymore." "This interview is over," Anderson said. "Fine. If that's your decision, then go ahead and leave. But I want to be clear for everyone watching. I gave Meghan Markle a platform to share her perspective, to address the questions that people have been asking, and she chose to walk away rather than engage in a substantive conversation. That says something, and I'll let the audience draw their own conclusions about what it says. So what do you think about all of this? Was this a fair interview, or did it cross a line? Make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Meghan was justified in walking off, or should she have stayed and continued to engage with Anderson's questions? I want to hear from you, so let me know in the comments right now.